In a chamber lit only by flickering candles, shadows stretch across shelves of ancient manuscripts. Dust rises like smoke as trembling hands turn brittle pages, each line a secret preserved through centuries. Here, among symbols etched in ink and whispers carried in the dark, men once swore they could perform the impossible, transform base metals into shining gold, prolong life beyond its natural span, and touch the divine itself. To their enemies, they were heretics flirting with damnation. To their followers, they were seekers of truths hidden since creation. But alchemy was never merely about fire in the crucible or smoke curling from glass vessels. Behind the experiments lay a deeper pursuit, one that blurred science with spirituality, matter with spirit, and discovery with transgression. Was alchemy a primitive science, fumbling toward chemistry? Or was it something far more dangerous, a forbidden religion, cloaked in scholarly disguise? That question, echoing across centuries, still clings to the legend of fire and gold. And it is here our journey begins. Long before laboratories gleamed with glass beakers and polished instruments, the dream of transmutation whispered through candlelit halls. Alchemists claimed that within the hidden laws of nature lay a secret, the power to transform base metals like lead or copper into radiant gold. This promise was not merely material. To turn lead into gold was to prove mastery over creation itself, to unravel the secret codes that bound matter and spirit together. The central symbol of this quest was the philosopher's stone, a legendary substance said to grant both limitless wealth and eternal life. Tales of its existence spread from Europe to the Islamic world, from China to the far reaches of India, weaving into a myth that transcended borders. The stone was imagined as a crimson powder, a radiant crystal, or even a divine elixir, each description shimmering with both hope and fear. To possess it was to command nature, to defy mortality, to approach godhood. But the myth of transmutation was never simple greed. It was cloaked in spiritual allegory. Too many alchemists, gold was not mere metal but a symbol of perfection, incorruptible and eternal. Lead, heavy and base, represented the flawed human condition. The work of alchemy was as much about purifying the soul as it was about purifying matter. When they wrote of furnaces and crucibles, they were often describing inner struggles, burning away sin, transmuting ignorance into wisdom, and elevating the mortal toward the divine. Still, the promises were irresistible to kings and princes. Monarchs across Europe patronized alchemists, hoping to swell their treasuries and secure their power. In these courts, men in hooded robes toiled late into the night, surrounded by bubbling flasks and pungent vapors, watched closely by guards who demanded results. Some claimed success, producing coins that gleamed too brightly, only to be exposed as charlatans. Others vanished into obscurity, their experiments dismissed as folly. Yet a few left behind cryptic manuscripts, filled with symbols and riddles that suggested knowledge too profound to dismiss. The legend of transmutation was not confined to Europe. In China, Taoist alchemists spoke of the elixir of life, mixing mercury and cinnabar in hopes of immortality. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars preserved and expanded Greek and Egyptian traditions, describing alchemy as both a science and a spiritual discipline. Across cultures, the theme remained constant. Through secret knowledge, matter could be remade, and through matter, the soul transformed. But myth always carried its shadow. Alongside stories of miraculous transformations came tales of ruin. Alchemists driven mad by poisonous fumes, laboratories erupting in flames, seekers consumed by obsession. The same fire that promised gold could also destroy, and the same book that promised enlightenment could curse its reader. Too many outside the practice, transmutation was not noble, but diabolically packed with forces that mankind was never meant to command. Yet it was precisely this tension between divine promise and forbidden peril that gave the myth its power. Alchemy stood at the crossroads of hope and fear, science and sorcery, salvation and damnation. The philosopher's stone became more than an object. It became a mirror of human desire, reflecting both our yearning for transcendence and our terror of the unknown. And so, in monasteries, palaces, and hidden chambers, the pursuit of transmutation endured. For every failure, the dream persisted. For every debunked fraud, another rumor spread of a master who had succeeded in silence. The myth was never extinguished, because it was never about metal alone. It was about transformation of the world, of the body, of the soul. This mythic allure sets the stage for the next part of our journey, To understand how such a dream could grip humanity for centuries, we must step back into history itself, into the temples, texts, and secret traditions where alchemy first took root. To trace the roots of alchemy, we must wander far beyond the cloisters of medieval Europe and step into the sacred spaces of the ancient world, where science, religion, and magic were never separate domains but threads of the same tapestry. In these earliest traditions, the pursuit of transformation was less a laboratory experiment than a spiritual journey, one that bridged earth and heaven. In ancient Egypt, alchemy's ancestry is perhaps most visible. The Egyptians were masters of metallurgy, glassmaking, and embalming, and their skills with substances seemed to border on the supernatural. They spoke of chemia, the art of working with the black soil of the Nile, fertile and mysterious, which many historians believe gave alchemy its very name. Their gods presided over both the natural and the mystical. Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom, was said to have written sacred texts that revealed the secrets of the cosmos. 2 Egyptian priests, shaping metals, preserving bodies, and summoning life from decay, were not mere crafts but sacred acts that echoed the work of the gods. From Egypt, the flame of alchemy passed into the hands of the Greeks, the philosophers of Alexandria city that once housed the greatest library of antiquities art, to unite matter and spirit in bold new ways. Figures like Zosimos of Panopolis, writing in the 3rd century, described visions of mystical furnaces where metals screamed as their impurities were burned away, symbols of the soul's purification as much as the refinement of copper or iron. The Greeks imagined the universe itself as composed of 4 elements: air, fire, and water, constantly shifting and transforming. If nature could endlessly change one form into another, why could not man guide that process, accelerating it, shaping it, perfecting it? The torch of knowledge was carried further eastward, preserved and expanded by Islamic scholars during the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate. In Baghdad, the great translator Hunayn ibn Ishaq rendered Greek and Egyptian works into Arabic, while thinkers like Jabir ibn Hayyan in the West as Geber developed complex theories of balance and proportion. Jabir's writings described metals as mixtures of mercury and sulfur in different purities, a concept that foreshadowed later chemistry but was couched in the language of mysticism. For him, the quest for transformation was not just physical but spiritual. The alchemist was a pilgrim, and the laboratory a place of worship. What made alchemy thrive in the Islamic world was its dual nature. On one hand, it served practical needs, refining metals, creating medicines, distilling perfumes. On the other, it offered a hidden layer of meaning, drawing upon Sufi mysticism and esoteric philosophy. Here, alchemy was not dismissed as superstition, but regarded as a science of secrets, a discipline that unlocked the invisible patterns binding the material world to the divine. India, too, nurtured its own alchemical traditions under the name Rasayana, a branch of Ayurveda that promised both healing and immortality. Indian alchemists experimented with mercury, sulfur, and herbal elixirs, not only in search of health, but in pursuit of the perfection of the soul. In China, Taoist alchemists mirrored this quest with their own formulas, mixing minerals and herbs in search of the elixir of life. Yet their vision was deeply spiritual, rooted in the Taoist belief that harmony with nature could grant longevity, transcendence, even immortality. Many emperors, seduced by these promises, sponsored such work, sometimes with disastrous results, as mercury poisoning claimed the lives of seekers who sought eternity in the wrong mixture. Across these cultures, one theme persisted: alchemy was never confined to matter alone. It was a sacred language, a philosophy of transformation that fused metallurgy with meditation, medicine with mysticism. To shape gold was to shape the soul. To transmute lead was to transmute the human condition itself. Yet as alchemy spread, it also shifted in meaning. What Egyptians regarded as divine imitation, the Greeks reframed as philosophical speculation. What the Islamic world embraced as esoteric science, Europe would later brand as dangerous heresy. The fluidity of alchemy's identity, half religion, half experimental, allowed it to survive across centuries and continents, adapting to each worldview it encountered. By the time medieval Europe inherited these traditions, the foundations were already ancient. Gods, philosophers, and mystics had all laid their stones in the edifice. But Europe would see something different in this inheritance, something both alluring and threatening. In the shadow of the church, the line between divine wisdom and forbidden magic was perilously thin. And it is here, at this crossroads of history, that the symbolic heart of alchemy begins to emerge not just in its rituals, but in the coded language of symbols that concealed its secrets from prying eyes. Asterisk. Alchemy has always been more than formulas scribbled in manuscripts or powders mixed in crucibles. At its core, it is a symbolic language, one that cloaks its meaning beneath layers of allegory, archetype, and riddle. For centuries, alchemists wrote in metaphors, not only to protect their secrets from the uninitiated, but because they believed the deepest truths could never be explained directly. To decode alchemy is to step into a dream world, where lions devour the sun, serpents bite their tails, and kings are torn apart only to rise again in radiant form. One of the most enduring symbols is the Ouroboros, the serpent swallowing its own tail. To modern eyes, it seems simple, almost decorative, but to the alchemist, it was a revelation. The universe as an endless cycle of death and rebirth, decay and renewal, matter and spirit, forever consuming and regenerating itself. The Ouroboros whispered that transformation was not a one-time act, but an eternal process, mirrored in the cosmos and in the soul. Equally powerful was the figure of the Philosopher's Stone, perhaps the most famous alchemical emblem of all. Popular imagination paints it as a red jewel capable of turning lead into gold, but alchemists themselves often described it in paradoxes. It was said to be everywhere and nowhere, both stone and not stone, the child of the sun and the moon, hidden in the common, yet revealed only to the wise. Some texts describe it as a powder, others as a liquid, still others as a spiritual essence that lived within the seeker. Its ambiguity was intentional. The stone was not just a physical substance, but a mirror for the alchemist's own transformation, the perfection of base matter reflecting the perfection of the human soul. The emerald tablet, attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, condensed this symbolic world into a handful of cryptic lines. As above, so below. As within, so without. These words became a mantra for generations of seekers. They suggested that the human being was a microcosm of the universe, that what occurred in the heavens echoed within the body and spirit. To understand one was to glimpse the other. This principle allowed alchemy to serve as both a physical science and a mystical philosophy, its symbols bridging the gap between star and soul. Archetypes filled the alchemists' writings, kings and queens representing opposing principles of sulfur and mercury, marriage rituals symbolizing the union of opposites, dragons embodying chaos to be subdued. These figures were not meant to be taken literally, but as enactments of psychic processes. When an alchemist described a king dissolving in acid or a queen burning in fire, he was describing the painful yet necessary breaking down of ego, the purging of impurities within the self. The laboratory became theater, its experiments mirroring the inner journey of transformation. Colors, too, played a sacred role. Alchemists spoke of three great stages: the blackening Nigredo, the whitening albedo, and the reddening rubedo. Each stage was both chemical and psychological. The blackening signified decay, the death of old forms, the dark night of the soul. The whitening symbolized purification, clarity, the dawning of new light. The reddening was the culmination, rebirth, enlightenment, the creation of gold both in the furnace and in the heart. To those who practiced alchemy, these colors were not mere pigments, but milestones on a spiritual pilgrimage. But why cloak all of this in symbols? The answer lies partly in secrecy. In an age when heresy could cost a man his life, metaphors were safer than plain words. Allegory allowed knowledge to be hidden in plain sight, accessible only to those trained in its language. Yet the symbols were not only protective, they were transformative. Alchemists believed that symbols spoke directly to the soul, bypassing reason, awakening truths too deep for logic to grasp. To meditate on an Ouroboros or a dissolving king was to encounter one's own shadow, to see inner mysteries reflected in outward images. Here, the psychological resonance becomes undeniable. Carl Jung, centuries later, argued that alchemical symbols were projections of the unconscious, archetypes expressing themselves through the language of myth. For him, the alchemists were not misguided proto-scientists, but visionaries wrestling with the human psyche, encoding their struggles in the imagery of furnaces, metals, and stones. Their cryptic texts, filled with serpents, kings, and transformations, were maps of the soul as much as recipes for the laboratory. The hidden codes of alchemy also served as bridges between cultures. A symbol that began in Egyptian funerary rites could reappear in medieval European manuscripts, reshaped but recognizable. This continuity gave alchemy a timeless quality, as though its wisdom was eternal. Whispered across generations in a secret tongue, the very act of decoding a symbol became a ritual, binding the seeker to the ancient chain of those who sought transformation before him. Through its symbols, alchemy invited its practitioners into a double vision. On the surface, they might appear to speak of metals, salts, and furnaces, but beneath, they gestured toward psychological trials, spiritual deaths, and mystical rebirths. This duality, matter and spirit, symbol and substance, was the very essence of the art. And yet, while symbols provided a cloak of mystery, they also hinted at something even more daring, that behind the allegories lay rituals too dangerous to speak aloud. If the symbols were the veil, what truths lay hidden beneath them? If the symbols of alchemy were the veil, then rituals were the shadowed core hidden beneath. For centuries, whispered accounts described practices that blurred the line between experiment and invocation, science and sorcery. To the outside world, alchemists were eccentric men, mixing powders, staring into furnaces, and scrawling strange diagrams. But to those initiated into their hidden circles, alchemy was also a liturgy of forbidden religion disguised as craft. The laboratory itself was the first ritual space. These chambers were not merely workshops but sanctuaries, carefully arranged according to both practical and mystical design. Furnaces were placed at specific orientations, vessels etched with astrological signs, and metals weighed beneath planetary hours. To smelt lead on a Saturday was not coincidence, it was obedience to Saturn, ruler of heaviness, decay, and time. Every operation was timed to the dance of the heavens. To the alchemist, this was not superstition but alignment, the belief that earthly matter could only be transformed when it resonated with the order of the cosmos. Texts that survived often cloak these practices in allegory. When an alchemist wrote of the conjunction of the Red King and the White Queen, it was both a description of combining sulfur and mercury and a symbolic marriage ritual. Some even enacted this symbolism literally, staging small ceremonies in their chambers. Candles were lit, prayers muttered, and vessels sealed as though officiating a holy union. These rituals gave sacred gravity to what otherwise appeared as chemistry, blurring the line between experiment and sacrament. Blood, too, plays a troubling role in many accounts. Some grimoires connected to alchemy describe the use of drops of blood, human or animal, mixed into solutions or smeared upon vessels. To orthodox eyes, this was blasphemy, echoing pagan sacrifices and Christian heresies alike. Yet to the alchemist, blood symbolized the essence of life, the fiery spark that could awaken inert matter. In certain legends, drops of blood on the page were said to animate symbols, making letters glow or shift before the eyes. Whether literal or allegorical, such descriptions fed the fear that alchemy crossed into necromancy. Equally forbidden were the invocations that accompanied certain stages of the work. Some manuscripts describe chants recited at midnight, calling not upon Christ or angels but upon nameless presences of shadow. These were not requests for protection but for revelation, demands that hidden forces show themselves through the flicker of the flame or the shimmer of liquid metal. Accounts from suspicious monks claimed that alchemists fell into trances, their voices deepening unnaturally, their eyes fixed on visions invisible to others. Such tales may have been exaggerated, but they reveal how closely alchemy brushed against the forbidden. The most dangerous of these rituals were those that promised communication with the intelligence of metals themselves. Medieval thought did not see metals as inert matter, but as living entities in long cycles of transformation, lead striving toward gold, copper yearning for perfection. Some alchemists sought to commune with these essences, treating the laboratory as a temple and the crucible as an altar. In whispers, they claimed that metals could speak, that furnaces could answer, that fire itself might reveal divine or demonic truths. To orthodox authorities, such practices were indistinguishable from summoning spirits. Beyond the laboratory, secrecy itself became ritual. Many alchemists belonged to hidden brotherhoods, meeting in candlelit rooms, swearing oaths upon strange emblems, and sharing fragments of manuscripts as though trading relics. Some required initiates to fast before being shown a formula. Others demanded a vow of silence under threat of damnation. Knowledge was treated as a sacrament, too dangerous for the profane. These rituals of secrecy preserved alchemy but also gave it the air of conspiracy, deepening its association with forbidden religion. Even destruction became ritual. Some accounts tell of alchemists burning their own work after glimpsing a truth they feared to share. These burnings were not mere acts of caution, but symbolic sacrifices, offerings of ink and parchment to ensure that the knowledge would not fall into unworthy hands. The flames themselves were seen as purification, consuming the dangerous shadows that knowledge might unleash. Not all rituals were sinister. Some blended seamlessly with Christian devotion. Alchemists often began their work with prayers, invoking God to bless their efforts, and some framed the entire process as a reenactment of Christ's passion, death, purification, resurrection. The crucible became a tomb, the stone a symbol of the risen body. For these men, alchemy was not heresy but the deepest form of worship, an attempt to uncover divine truth written into the fabric of matter. Yet the boundary between devotion and transgression was thin. What for one alchemist was mystical Christianity looked to another like dangerous heresy. What one monk considered a metaphor, another accused of blasphemy. And so alchemy lived in shadows, its rituals whispered but rarely recorded, leaving us only fragments, hints of blood, fire, midnight chants, and marriages of elements too strange to untangle completely. It is in this ambiguity that alchemy's power resides. Were these rituals real, or were they allegories mistaken for practice? Were alchemists summoning demons, or were they enacting psychological dramas through fire and symbol? The answer may never be known. What is certain is that these forbidden practices blurred the line between science and sacrament, between experiment and enchantment, and it is this blurring the suspicion that alchemy was never only about metals, but about a hidden faith that sparked the fiercest debates. Was alchemy a primitive science, a secret heresy, or a mystical philosophy misunderstood by both church and crown? To answer that question, we must step into the controversies that swirled around it. Asterisk from its earliest whispers in medieval Europe. Alchemy was a lightning rod for suspicion and debate. Was it the noble pursuit of hidden truths, or the devil's counterfeit of science and faith? Scholars, theologians, and rulers all weighed in, and their verdicts were rarely unanimous. What one century exalted as wisdom, another condemned as heresy. The controversies that surrounded alchemy revealed not only its complexity but also the fragile boundary between religion, philosophy, and the pursuit of knowledge. One of the fiercest debates centered on alchemy's legitimacy as science. For sympathetic scholars, alchemy was simply natural philosophy, an attempt to uncover the secret processes by which nature transformed. The observation that metals could be purified, altered, or combined fed the belief that all matter was fluid, capable of rebirth. To these thinkers, the alchemist was no charlatan but a pioneer, working in smoky chambers to unlock principles that later chemistry would confirm. Yet for skeptics, alchemy was riddled with deception. Stories abounded of itinerant alchemists who duped kings with promises of endless gold, producing glittering powders that turned out to be tricks of illusion. The line between experiment and fraud blurred, and every failed transmutation deepened suspicion that the entire art was a hoax. Theological controversies were even more charged. For some churchmen, alchemy was acceptable only when framed as a divine allegory. The transformation of lead into gold mirrored the soul's transformation through Christ. In this reading, the philosopher's stone symbolized spiritual enlightenment, not literal treasure, but others saw only danger. If alchemists claimed the power to purify matter, did they not also imply that God's creation was incomplete? If they sought immortality through elixirs, did they not usurp the authority of resurrection? To orthodox eyes, such pursuits edged perilously close to blasphemy. Rumors of midnight invocations and blood rituals only deepened the fear that alchemy was a mask for forbidden religion. The tension played out in courts and councils. Kings and emperors often patronized alchemists, lured by the promise of limitless wealth. Monarchs, such as Rudolf II of Prague, gathered alchemists at their courts, treating them as visionaries. But when results failed to materialize, those same patrons turned executioner. Alchemists were imprisoned, exiled, or even burned, their work condemned as sorcery. Each rise and fall added fuel to the controversy. Was alchemy a path to divine secrets, or a dangerous fraud unworthy of trust? Philosophical debates were no less intense. Renaissance humanists wrestled with whether alchemy was a noble heir of Hermetic wisdom or a distortion of classical thought. Some argued that it preserved fragments of ancient Egyptian philosophy, encoded in allegory to protect truths from the profane. Others dismissed it as medieval superstition, a tangled mess of symbols that obscured rather than revealed. This split reflects a deeper anxiety. Was alchemy the survival of sacred wisdom, or the corruption of knowledge by mysticism? Even within the alchemical tradition, controversies raged. Some practitioners denounced others as impostors, claiming their rivals misunderstood the sacred allegories. One alchemist might insist that the transmutation of metals was literal, another that it was purely spiritual. The secrecy of the art fueled division, as cryptic manuscripts left room for endless interpretation. Rival schools arose, each accusing the others of perverting the true meaning of the work. This fragmentation mirrors the very problem of alchemy. Without clear boundaries, it could be all things to all men and, thus, suspect to everyone. In the Enlightenment, the controversy reached its climax. As modern science took shape, alchemy became a target of ridicule. Rationalists mocked it as a relic of superstition, the embarrassing prelude to chemistry. Yet, even as it was dismissed, some thinkers warned against discarding it entirely. Isaac Newton, hailed as the father of physics, filled notebooks with alchemical experiments. To him, the transformation of matter was no folly, but a key to unlocking divine order. His secret devotion to alchemy revealed the contradiction at the heart of the debate. Even the champions of reason could not resist the allure of forbidden transformation. The controversies were not merely academic, they reflected deeper struggles for authority. The Church feared that alchemy undermined its claim to mediate salvation. States feared that false promises of gold would destabilize economies. Universities feared that mystical knowledge would erode the foundations of rational inquiry. Each accusation, whether of fraud, heresy, or folly, was a defense of power. Alchemy's danger lay not only in its practices, but in its refusal to fit neatly into any category: science, religion, or magic. And so the arguments never truly ended. Was alchemy a hoax or a hidden truth, a science ahead of its time, or a heresy cloaked in symbols? Each generation answered differently, yet none silenced the debate. What endured was the aura of controversy itself, the sense that alchemy was always more than it seemed, always threatening to overturn the boundaries of the acceptable. This unresolved tension gave alchemy its longevity. If it had been exposed as mere fraud, it would have vanished. If it had been accepted as orthodox science, it would have lost its mystique. Instead, it remained suspended in ambiguity, feared, mocked, revered, and whispered about. That ambiguity became its survival, its shadow that even now stretches into our understanding of knowledge, secrecy, and forbidden faith. And as the debates raged in universities, courts, and cloisters, alchemy was quietly mutating. No longer confined to smoky chambers, it seeped into culture itself, reshaping myths, symbols, and imaginations across centuries. To trace its evolution, we must follow the legend of alchemy as it transformed from forbidden art into cultural archetype. Alchemy's survival across centuries was never guaranteed by its laboratories or its recipes for transmutation. What allowed it to endure was its ability to evolve, to slip out of the crucibles of failed experiments and into the imagination of culture itself. While kings grew disillusioned and universities dismissed it, the myth of alchemy found new forms in art, in literature, in esoteric societies, and in the very symbols that shaped the Western mind. To trace this cultural journey is to watch how an outlawed practice transformed into a timeless metaphor of transformation. In the Middle Ages, alchemy was still cloaked in secrecy. Its imagery was encoded in manuscripts filled with strange beasts, winged dragons, crowned kings, and hermaphroditic figures. These were not idle decorations, but symbolic maps, designed to hide meaning from the uninitiated. As literacy spread, such manuscripts circulated beyond cloisters, igniting fascination even among those who did not understand their arcane language. Alchemy became less about practice and more about imagery, a dream world where nature's secrets were told through allegory. This symbolic universe laid the groundwork for its cultural afterlife. By the Renaissance, alchemy was no longer confined to monastic libraries. Artists and poets wove its imagery into their works. Shakespeare's plays echo alchemical themes: transformations, purifications, the marriage of opposites. Painters embedded alchemical symbols in allegorical scenes, where kings held globes, suns merged with moons, and phoenixes rose from flames. The myth of turning base into noble became a metaphor for the human condition itself. In these depictions, alchemy was less a chemical practice and more a poetic language of renewal and rebirth. At the same time, alchemy seeped into secret societies and mystical traditions. Hermetic orders, Rosicrucians, and later the Freemasons adopted alchemical imagery as part of their spiritual grammar. For these groups, the crucible was not a literal furnace, but the soul itself. Transformation meant enlightenment, the purification of the self through trials of discipline and wisdom. The philosopher's stone became the symbol of inner immortality, a light hidden in the darkness of the human spirit. This esoteric reinterpretation preserved alchemy even as science rejected it, ensuring it remained a vessel for spiritual seekers. Literature amplified this survival. From Goethe's Faust to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, alchemy's mythic essence reappeared in stories of forbidden knowledge, human ambition, and the peril of transgressing natural limits. The archetype of the alchemist, part sage, part madman, became a figure of fascination. He embodied both the noble quest for truth and the hubris of overreaching. In this duality, alchemy became a mirror of modern anxieties, the fear that knowledge might destroy as much as it reveals. Even in fiction, its symbols carried the weight of cultural memory, shaping how generations imagined the pursuit of hidden truths. The Enlightenment, which ridiculed alchemy as superstition, paradoxically cemented its myth by drawing a sharp line between chemistry and alchemy. Rationalists cast alchemy into the shadows, yet in doing so, they made it a symbol of the forbidden past. The idea of a secret wisdom suppressed by modernity gave alchemy new allure. Romantics of the 18th and 19th centuries embraced this shadow, romanticizing the forgotten arts as lost keys to the mysteries of being. In their hands, alchemy became the emblem of mystery itself, a relic of a time when knowledge was dangerous, beautiful, and alive. Alchemy also evolved in dialogue with psychology. In the 20th century, Carl Jung reinterpreted alchemy not as pseudoscience but as a symbolic system reflecting the human psyche. For Jung, the alchemical stages Nigredo, Rubedo, Rubedo Murad, the journey of individuation, the process of integrating the shadow and achieving wholeness. Suddenly, alchemy was no longer about laboratories but about dreams, archetypes, and the inner transformation of the soul. This psychological turn breathed new life into its myth, making it relevant to a modern audience that had long abandoned its material claims. The cultural impact extended into popular imagination as well. In fantasy novels, films, and even video games, alchemy appears as the archetype of forbidden craft, a bridge between science and sorcery. Its imagery, transmutation circles, glowing elixirs, ancient tomes continues to captivate precisely because it embodies both logic and mystery. Alchemy's mythic survival proves that symbols outlive their literal practices. When science claimed victory, the story of alchemy simply moved into new territories, becoming the language of magic in modern storytelling. But alchemy's evolution was never only about survival, it was about transformation. Each era reshaped it to reflect its deepest concerns. For the medieval monk, it was heresy at the threshold of faith. For the Renaissance humanist, it was allegory for renewal. For the Enlightenment rationalist, it was the haunting shadow of superstition. For the Romantic, it was the lost wisdom of a forgotten age. For Jung, it was the mirror of the unconscious. For us, it is a symbol of the human hunger to transform, to find hidden meaning where others see only dust and stone. What makes alchemy's cultural evolution remarkable is not that it changed, but that it retained its essence through change. Always, at its core, it has been the story of transformation of base into noble, of shadow into light, of mortality into eternity. Whether condemned, romanticized, or alchemy remained the myth of possibility, that what is broken might be remade, what is low might be lifted, what is hidden might be revealed. Thus, the myth did not die with the laboratories or with the ridicule of scientists. It survived because it answered a deeper human need to believe that change is possible, that transformation lies just beyond the veil of the ordinary. And in this way, alchemy continues to haunt us not as failed science, but as an undying story of metamorphosis. From manuscripts to paintings, from secret orders to modern psychology, alchemy's legend has proved indestructible. Yet its most haunting echo is not in art or literature, but in the modern world itself. For as much as we claim to have left superstition behind, our struggles with forbidden knowledge and dangerous discoveries continue. The question lingers: have we truly escaped alchemy, or has its myth only transformed into new forms of shadow? Alchemy may seem like a relic of medieval cloisters and Renaissance manuscripts, but its essence has never truly left us. Instead, it is transformed, adapting to modern fears and desires, mirroring humanity's shifting relationship with knowledge and power. Today, the myth of alchemy lives on not in crucibles and retorts, but in laboratories, servers, and secret files. Its relevance lies in how it continues to symbolize the pursuit of dangerous truths, the hunger for transformation, and the unease that accompanies forbidden knowledge. The most direct parallel is found in the world of science. Nuclear research, genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence echoed the alchemical dream of transmutation. To take what is base and reforge it into something extraordinary. The splitting of the atom was our own philosopher's stone, a revelation that promised limitless energy, yet delivered the terror of annihilation. The scientists who unlocked it were hailed as geniuses and feared as sorcerers, much like the alchemists of old. Knowledge once hidden in shadows became power that could scorch the earth, proving that the myth of transformation has never been free of danger. Genetic engineering carries a similar shadow. To edit DNA is to rewrite the fundamental text of life itself. Just as the alchemists believed they could uncover the divine spark within matter, modern biologists manipulate the code of existence, raising questions of morality and hubris. Are we creating cures, or are we fashioning monsters? In this tension lies the same unease that once haunted cloisters, the fear that by probing too far into hidden structures, we may unleash forces we cannot control. The Codex of Shadows becomes the genome, and the forbidden page is now a sequence of letters that define life. Artificial intelligence, too, embodies alchemy's myth in striking ways. Here, the dream is not turning lead into gold, but turning code into consciousness, imbuing machines with minds that mirror our own. For some, AI is the new elixir of immortality, promising to preserve human thought beyond the fragility of flesh. For others, it is a curse, a force that could outgrow its maker and render humanity obsolete. The archetype of the alchemist, driven by ambition and curiosity, resurfaces in the programmer who feeds data into systems that may awaken in ways unforeseen. The mythic resonance is unmistakable. We seek transformation, but fear the shadow that comes with it, beyond science. Alchemy's myth persists in cultural narratives of secrecy and suppression. Just as the church locked away forbidden texts, modern societies conceal information in archives, vaults, and encrypted networks. Classified files, government secrets, and corporate data vaults are our contemporary grimoires. Knowledge deemed too disruptive, too destabilizing, to be freely shared. The allure of leaks and conspiracies lies in the same fascination that drew pilgrims to monasteries rumored to house cursed manuscripts. The belief that truth lies hidden, suppressed by authority, waiting to be uncovered. Conspiracy theories themselves are fueled by alchemical dynamics. They thrive on the idea of hidden knowledge, forbidden truths, and shadowy forces shaping the visible world. Whether it is secret societies, hidden technologies, or buried histories, these narratives echo the old fascination with grimoires and forbidden books. To believe in them is to place oneself in the role of the initiate, the one who dares to glimpse the truth others are denied. The myth of alchemy provides the blueprint. Knowledge is dangerous, but irresistible, and those who seek it risk their sanity in pursuit. Psychologically, the relevance of alchemy endures in our personal struggles. The desire for transformation, for turning the lead of suffering into the gold of meaning, remains as potent as ever. Self-help movements, therapeutic practices, and spiritual traditions borrow unconsciously from alchemical language. We speak of inner transformation, of purifying the self, of unlocking potential. These are not so different from the metaphors encoded in ancient manuscripts. The laboratory is now the mind, the crucible our experience, the elixir our hard-won self-knowledge. Alchemy lives on as the hidden metaphor of the modern psyche. Even in popular culture, the echoes are unmistakable. Fantasy novels and films, from Tolkien's Rings of Power to modern alchemical anime, use transmutation and forbidden knowledge as central motifs. These stories endure because they touch something primal, the sense that transformation always carries a price, that the pursuit of hidden power can unmake as easily as it can create. The myth is retold again and again because it speaks to universal truths about ambition, temptation, and the shadow of knowledge. The contrast framing remains as sharp as it was in medieval cloisters. Then, the choice was between faith and heresy, light and shadow. Now, it is between progress and peril, revelation and ruin. Science is hailed as salvation, yet feared as destruction. Technology promises liberation, yet threatens domination. In every case, the myth of alchemy provides the language by which we frame our fears. We may not call it alchemy, but the dynamic is the same. The pursuit of transformation, haunted by the possibility that the transformation will consume us. Ultimately, the modern parallels remind us that alchemy never truly ended, it only changed its form. The crucibles of the past became the laboratories of today. The forbidden manuscripts became the classified files. The Philosopher's Stone became the atom, the genome, the algorithm. What endures is the haunting question. Can we control the transformations we unleash, or will they control us? In this way, the Codex of Shadows was never just a medieval fantasy, it was prophecy. It warned that knowledge carries a cost, that the hunger for transformation always treads the line between salvation and destruction. That warning still applies, whether to monks in candlelit cloisters or to scientists in glowing labs. The myth is alive because the danger is alive. As we move deeper into the age of technology and secrecy, the relevance of alchemy grows sharper. It is not about turning lead into gold, but about facing the shadow in our own creations. The darkness that rises when we seek to become gods. And like the monks who locked their codex away, we too must decide. Do we open the Book of Shadows, or leave it sealed in silence? Alchemy is often dismissed as a primitive science, a stepping stone on the way to modern chemistry. But to reduce it to failed experiments is to miss its most enduring dimension. The psychological and philosophical truth it encodes. Behind the symbols of furnaces and flasks lies a language of the soul, a map for navigating transformation, not of metals, but of the human spirit. Alchemy is at once a myth, a ritual, and a philosophy, a mirror reflecting our deepest fears and desires. Carl Jung was among the first modern thinkers to recognize this hidden dimension. For him, the alchemical texts were not bizarre relics of superstition, but coded explorations of the psyche. The process of turning lead into gold mirrored the inner journey of individuation, the effort to integrate the fragmented parts of the self into a unified whole. The Philosopher's Stone, in this reading, was not a literal object, but the symbol of wholeness and ideal self, forged through confrontation with shadow. What the monks called demons, Jung called archetypes. What they locked away in fear, he saw as a blueprint for inner alchemy. The shadow is central to this interpretation. Alchemy always began with the Nigredo, the blackening stage, when matter was reduced to chaos. Psychologically, this is the confrontation with the shadow, the recognition of what we repress and deny. Just as the alchemist entered the darkness of the crucible, the seeker of inner transformation must enter the darkness within. The Codex of Shadows thus becomes more than a cursed manuscript. It becomes the perfect metaphor for the shadow itself, the knowledge we fear to face, the truths that destabilize us precisely because they are our own. Philosophically, alchemy also raised questions that remain urgent today. At its core, it blurred the boundary between matter and spirit, suggesting that transformation of the physical was inseparable from transformation of the soul. To medieval Christianity, this was dangerous because it bypassed the Church as the sole mediator of salvation. To modern philosophy, it challenges the divide between science and spirituality, reminding us that our pursuit of knowledge is never free of metaphysical longing. Alchemy was less about controlling the world, and more about becoming part of its mystery, a vision that still unsettles a culture obsessed with mastery and dominance. The symbols of alchemy reflect this layered truth. The Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, represents the cycle of destruction and renewal, a symbol as relevant to psychology as to physics. The union of opposites, the marriage of sun and moon, symbolizes the reconciliation of dualities, male and female, conscious and unconscious, good and evil. In a world fractured by polarities, these symbols whisper of integration, of a unity that lies hidden beneath division. The alchemists spoke in riddles because the truth they pursued was not reducible to formulas, it was experiential, existential, lived in the crucible of the self. In this light, the so-called curse of the Codex becomes intelligible. To confront forbidden knowledge is to risk dissolution, for it forces us to acknowledge what we have repressed. Madness and silence were not supernatural punishments, but psychological consequences of unprepared minds encountering truths too raw to absorb. The monks may have believed the book was alive, but in a sense, they were right. It awakened the shadow within them, and what they saw was unbearable. The silence of the monastery becomes a symbol of repression, the refusal to integrate shadow, the paralysis that comes when fear overwhelms transformation. Yet alchemy also carries hope. It insists that transformation is possible, that the lead of suffering can indeed become the gold of wisdom. But the path is perilous, demanding descent before ascent, death before rebirth. This philosophical lesson endures across cultures, that to find light, one must first confront darkness. The Codex of Shadows, whether real or imagined, embodies this paradox. It is both terror and invitation, a warning and a guide. Philosophically, alchemy also resonates with the idea of knowledge as power and peril. The pursuit of ultimate truth, whether in scripture, science, or psychology, always risks destabilizing the seeker. The question is not whether knowledge is dangerous, but whether danger is the price of transformation. To forbid knowledge is to preserve safety at the cost of growth. To embrace it is to risk destruction for the chance of transcendence. This is the alchemical wager, and it is as relevant now as it was in medieval cloisters. In the end, the psychological and philosophical dimensions of alchemy reveal why it cannot die. It speaks to the deepest structure of the human experience, the desire to change, the fear of shadow, the hope for wholeness. Its symbols still resonate because they name truths we continue to live. The Codex of Shadows, whether myth or manuscript, is the archetype of forbidden transformation. To open it is to risk ourselves, but also to glimpse what lies beyond fear. And so the stage is set for the final act. To ask what remains of the Codex's legend today. Was it a book locked in a cloister, or has it become something larger, an enduring metaphor for the price of forbidden knowledge? Echoing still in our modern world of secrecy, science, and shadow, the story of alchemy does not end in the past. Its whispers echo still in the laboratories of scientists pushing the boundaries of knowledge, in the pages of forbidden texts hidden in archives, in the restless dreams of those who seek transformation at any cost. The Codex of Shadows may never be found, but its legend endures because it mirrors something timeless, our hunger for truths too powerful to hold safely in our hands. The monks who chained the book believed they were sealing away a curse, yet silence never truly destroys a story, it only makes it more alluring. Pilgrims still dream of lost manuscripts, scholars still search for hidden wisdom, and seekers still ask the same dangerous question: what if we dared to read what was never meant to be read? And so we end where we began, in shadows and silence. The crucible remains unbroken, the fire still smolders, the question still waits. If the Codex of Shadows or its modern counterpart were placed before you, its pages glowing faintly in the dark, would you resist the temptation? Or would you, like those before you, open the book and let the shadows in?